Hi everyone, welcome to Chapter 5 Bonding Singapore. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to tell me the challenges of a multi ethnic society like Singapore, whether ethnic diversity can be managed, and why it is important to manage ethnic diversity. It's important to understand the difference between race and religion. Race refers to Chinese, Malay, Indian, whereas religion refers to Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism. Chinese people are not always Buddhist, like some are Christians, some are atheists, so it's important to know the difference. Here's the big question. Singapore has so many people from different racial and religious backgrounds, and yet how is it that we are still so peaceful? The answer is that this peace doesn't come naturally. It is created by the state. The state maintains peace using policies like the HDB race quota, the Sedition Act, and also education and integration. We'll discuss more about this later. Multi-ethnicity has always been a main feature of Singapore. You know that Singapore became a British colony in 1819, and since then we've had people from all over the world coming to Singapore. Malays, Arabs, Chinese, Europeans, Indians, and Straits-born Chinese coming to Singapore to earn money. Straits-born Chinese refers to Peranakans, like the Little Nyonya. These migrants are usually young men, and after they've earned their money here, they would write a letter to their families to come down from China or India, wherever, and join them here in Singapore. History has shaped the way we live in Singapore as a multi-ethnic society. In the past few years, right, we've had a lot of foreigners coming to Singapore to work and study. Like, I'm sure a few of your classmates may be from China, Indonesia, Myanmar. There's also been a lot of xenophobia, which is the fear of things or people that is foreign or strange. Hang on, let's spell xenophobia. Phobia refers to a fear, okay? And xeno refers to anything that's foreign or strange. Now, isn't it funny that we Singaporeans were foreigners when we first came to this country, when our grandparents first came here, but now we are getting angry about foreign migrants coming to Singapore? Is it hypocritical? That's something that you can think about. Okay, English is the language of business and administration, and it's widely spoken and understood. When I say administration, I mean the government uses it, like it sends you letters. We also use Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil as our official languages. So when your parents receive very important letters from the government, like election slips or stuff regarding your CPF, it always comes in all four languages. Now we know that Singapore has been peaceful since the 1960s, but we cannot take this peace for granted. Our multi-ethnic composition can be a source of conflict if we don't manage it effectively. These threats can endanger the bond that we share. You might have heard the quote that people fear what they don't understand. In Singapore, people didn't understand those from other races back then, and so they didn't trust each other. I think this is partly Stamford Raffles' fault because he was responsible for creating the CMIO classification. CMIO, which stands for Chinese, Malay, Indian, Other. He divided Singapore into distinct areas, like one area for the Chinese, one area for the Malays, and one for the Indians. People had to live in their own areas, sorted according to race. This means that people from different races were segregated. Hang on, let's write that down. Segregated. They didn't interact except for economic reasons, like trading in the marketplace, and for that they would go to a neutral territory. They even went to separate schools, like if you ask your parents or your grandparents, they may have attended Chinese medium schools or English schools. So because people were segregated, there was a lot of suspicion and unhappiness. And in 1964, it led to the race riots. But there was another main reason for the race riots. Besides racial segregation, one very important cause was back in 1964 when the PAP went to take part in the Malaysian federal election. Okay, this might be a little confusing, like how would PAP's involvement in an election lead to race riots? But you have to remember that at that time, Singapore was part of Malaysia. Because of the merger but we still had partial self-governance in a sense that we could decide on our own internal affairs. Singapore's main political party was the PAP, whereas in Malaysia, their main political party was UMNO, which stands for United Malays National Organisation. UMNO supports special rights for the Malays, which means that the Malay people there get preferential treatment. Like, for example, Malay people would find it easier to start up a business than a Chinese person, for example. We call this Bumiputra. Let's see, special rights. Bumiputra. Bumiputra is when translated, it refers to sons of the soil. Sons of the soil. There was an unwritten agreement between the two political parties that they would not take part in each other's elections. So this PAP stays in Singapore and UMNO stays in Malaysia. But for some reason in 1964, the PAP went all the way up from Singapore to KL to take part in the Malaysian federal election, even though it was really none of their business. And this wouldn't be so bad if not for the fact that they actually managed to win one seat, just one. They managed to get more votes than UMNO in this one constituency. And this was in an area with a Malay majority, not even a Chinese majority. So UMNO was very, very, very angry with the PAP. They felt that the PAP was a threat to their power. UMNO decided to fight back by starting anti-PAP campaigns in Singapore. Now remember that UMNO supports Malay rights. In Singapore, we have no Bumiputra policies. Nobody gets any special treatment. UMNO tried to convince the Malay people in Singapore, those in Singapore, that they were being treated very badly by the PAP. UMNO also portrayed the resettlement program as an attempt to break up the Malay community, to separate them and so rob them of their power. As a result, the Singapore Malays began to feel very dissatisfied with the PAP. They believed that the PAP was racist. UMNO also used the newspaper Utusan Melayu to spread propaganda against the PAP. Remember that Utusan Melayu is a Malay newspaper, so it's mostly Malay people who read it. Propaganda is, let's try and spell propaganda. Propaganda. It refers to information that is biased or inaccurate. Sometimes the info is exaggerated, like how UMNO claimed that 3,000 Malay families were forced to pack up and move because of the resettlement policy, but in reality there were only 250 families. Utusan Melayu also sensationalized the news. Which means that they tried to blow up an issue into a big thing, to make it sound exciting, and this made the Malay readers angry, because you get angry when you read this kind of thing. UMNO also held rallies in Singapore to paint a picture of the PAP as anti-Malay, and this stirred up resentment among the Malay community. By July, the PAP realized, oh no, this is not good, the Malay community is turning against them. So it tried to hold a meeting with the Malay organizations in Singapore to explain its policies, to say, hey, we're not racist, and to address the unhappiness of the Malay community. The PAP acknowledged that the Malay community had a lower socio-economic status than the other races, but they promised to help the Malays improve over time. Let's see, socio-economic status. I don't think that's in your notes. So they promised to help the Malays improve over time through education and training. 1964 was when the racial riots took place. The Malays were in the streets celebrating the Prophet Muhammad's birthday, but they were instigated by UMNO activists, and the peaceful procession soon turned violent. This was the very first day of rioting, and 23 people were killed and more than 400 injured. To control the situation, the government declared a curfew, which means that everyone must stay home. You're not allowed to go out onto the streets. The curfew continued for 11 days, and it wasn't lifted except for a few hours to let people go out to buy food. The government also set up goodwill committees, which are like groups of people that go door to door telling you, please live peacefully with each other. The race riots were significant because, number one, they showed how easily Singapore can become violent, how our peace and harmony can be broken so easily. Number two, how important it is to control the media. You have to control the media. Oh, media refers to TV, newspapers, and maybe the radio as well. Because if the media isn't tightly controlled, it can be used to stir up emotions, especially used by external forces, which means in this case, UMNO. UMNO is an external force. And finally, the third point is that race is a very sensitive issue that can trigger disharmony and violence. It is extra sensitive. Just now we talked about race, right? Now we will look at religion. In 1950, we had the Maria Hertog riots, which was caused by tension and religious differences between the Muslims and Catholics. During World War II, Maria's parents were imprisoned by the Japanese, so they were locked up. They left Maria with a Malay woman, Cik Aminah, and so Maria lived with this Malay family for about 7 years, and she was raised as a Muslim. So you see, she has entered the Muslim community. She is considered one of them. This is even though her parents were Catholic. So when Maria was 13 years old, she married a 22-year-old, he's 22, a 22-year-old Muslim teacher. And in 1950, Maria's parents, this was after the war, her parents finally tracked her down and they asked the court to give them custody of Maria. They demanded custody. There was wide media coverage. This court trial was huge. It appeared in all the newspapers and TV and radio. The court decided to award custody to Maria's biological Dutch parents. Biological means the people that gave birth to you, essentially. So it's the Dutch parents. And this made the Muslim community angry. The Muslims felt that Maria was a Muslim girl and not a Dutch girl, not a Dutch Catholic girl. After awarding custody to Maria's Dutch parents, Justice Brown, who was the guy in charge, Justice Brown, he declared Maria's marriage invalid because it went against Dutch laws for a girl below 16 to marry. The Muslims were angry, of course, because they felt that the court was ignoring Muslim laws. Justice Brown also declared that Maria could not be a Muslim because her father was Catholic and he had the power to decide her religion. And this also made the Muslims angry because they felt that the court was forcing Maria, a Muslim girl, to change her religion. They felt that the court was unfair and biased against Muslims. This led to hostility towards the European community because the colonial administration at the time was mainly British. Remember, this is in 1950. Colonial administration. They were British. Take this down, okay? The court annulled Maria's marriage. Annul means you declare it invalid and you cancel it. The newspapers carried photographs of Maria kneeling before a Virgin Mary statue. Virgin Mary is Catholic, remember? Which made the Muslims angry because they felt that this Muslim girl is being forced against her will to convert to Catholicism. The Muslim community felt oppressed by the British colonial administration. Let's spell oppressed. Oppress means they control you, they stifle you, you don't get any rights. And they also, and the Malays also felt that it was insensitive